Hello and welcome back to my channel. This is the second session today. I thought I'd recap on some of the things I was talking about yesterday, about just some of the ground rules about the type of books I was going to use, and how much of the source material for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Now I'm going to keep my playthrough and videos limited to the core books. So that will be the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Player's Handbook, and the Monster Manual. I used to have some of the other ones, Unearthed Arcana, the Wilderness Survival Guide, and the Dungeoneer's Survival Guide, but I found them just a bit too much. Certainly on Unearthed Arcana I was not impressed with that at all. And classes like the Cavalier and the Barbarian were just a bit ridiculous. And I felt that everything that was in the original character classes, like the Ranger, the Paladin, even the Fighter, they were completely covered by the core rules, and it didn't need any further embellishment. And things like weapon proficiencies, it really was almost turning it into a different type of game. So that's why I'm quite happy just to stick with the core books, which I think have got enough information in them anyhow to satisfy. I do have a PDF of the DM's screen, which I might print out and use. And at stages, I'll probably access some of the Dragon magazine articles, which are almost official for certain things. So there's things that I've come across, like weather, spell components, specific articles dealing with some of them. So I think I'm going to use those where it's appropriate. One of the examples was if there's information missing from the core books, which is pretty rare in most cases, but say for encumbrance, if you want to try and find the weight in gold pieces or pounds for, say, items of equipment, dungeon equipment, that's not actually listed in the Player's Handbook, whereas there are some articles and various sources that you can go to, and it will give you an indication of what these are. So I'll probably collate them and use them in my calculations. So that's really just to recap on some of the information I wanted to cover in the first video, which I didn't get around to. So the next thing I want to do is talk about the starting base, or your hometown. So that's going to be the place where you are going to have your characters start the adventure. It's almost like a safe haven for them. They can use that as a base to recruit or gain equipment, spend their gold pieces on training. A safe space really for them to recuperate in the midst of the wild and dangerous wilderness. So I've got, I developed a way of trying to simulate towns, and I thought, well, why don't I almost treat a town a bit like an NPC character. And there are tables in the Dungeon Master's Guide which describe characters, and if I treat almost like the town's culture like a personality, I should be able to define some of the characteristics of the residents and the people that kind of occupy different levels of power or factions. I also have some pretty basic amendments that just give an overview to what the town is, its economic situation. So I thought, well, if I show you my starting town of freehold, and the sort of steps I went through to generate that, and then we could probably, as an exercise, just create our own town, call it March Town or something like that, and just generate it randomly and just see how that turns out. So here's my town of freehold. I've got that down as my starting town. Now, the way I generated the town was using these rules here that I'm just going to show you. These are my settlement rules, which cover some of the basics of generating the statistics and some information about the economic situation, whether it's a resource-based settlement, and some local events just to add a bit of colour. Now, as I go through it, you'll probably be able to understand how these all fit together. The first thing you do with your settlement is to determine what starting settlement it's going to be. Now, I use, within the starting hex, that's where I placed my settlement. And I've tended to just use a simple D6 generation. So on a 1 to 2, it's a village. On a 3 to 6, it's a town. Now, in this instance, I generated a town. The population I generated from page 172, a number that isn't imprinted in my brain. Oh, it's 173, not imprinted in my brain that much, obviously. Town, 10. Population, 1,500 to 6,500. So a simple D6. Now, obviously, in the case of freehold, I generated a 1. So I've got a nice small town on the edge of civilization. The government type, there are a number of, within the world creation areas of the DM's guide, there is a section on government forms. Now, because this is basically a feudal kingdom, or generally is has feudal polities that are represented. I usually roll a percentage to see whether anything is non-feudal, and there's a 20% chance that the settlement will be non-feudal. If that is the case, I go to this table here and just roll a die 20, ignore the fidelity, which is one of these, government of a feudal nature, and just use that as the town government. Now, in this instance, I didn't generate the 20%. I have a feudal structure. Now, when it came to, if it's feudal, feudal will be part of the same polity. So this is a town that belongs to the kingdom. That's the rule in this world system that I'm using. It means that the ruler will be a liegeman of the king or baron or whatever is in charge of the area. So you can determine the ruler as an NPC with personality like any other NPC. I determine the class as a character, so a character class. So you can use the castle table in the DM's guide, or I've also looked at the nobles entry in the city town encounters as a guide. So if we look at the city town encounters, which are over here, under noble, we have at the end here, nobles are 50% likely to be fighters, and of them 80% are likely to be fighters or clerics, and 80% of them will be fighters and 20% clerics. So you could roll a percentage, and on 51 to 50, you select one of these two and generate the level. And if that isn't the case, you could probably just generate it like a character in this bit here. Now I will be going in one of the next sessions, going through character generation, and I've used the I thought I'd try and make it as random as possible. So I've used this random character generation for my party, and I found that worked out really well. So I'll go through an example of that, but you can also use it for the leader in this instance. So I think in this case I have just generated a fighter, and I've called him Lord Roderick. Good English name. So therefore I've got my feudal. One of the rules of this world that I want to develop is that it's human dominated. So there are demi-humans, and there are obviously humanoids and evil races and stuff, but it's majoritively human dominated, and that is the overall culture. Moving on to the actual details of the generation, we have an important factor, which is alignment. Now again, I had a bit of a think about this, and I thought there's not going to be too many areas that will be evil or chaotic, because they just do not really support a stable government that characters could actually be based in. It would be too dangerous, certainly for starting level 1 to 3 characters. So therefore the overriding alignment of civilized areas is lawful, and moving on to towards the good spectrum of that. So there is an alignment table here, and I've classified the town as lawful neutral, but I also have here is the recap of just what I was talking about. The population is always majority human, as demi-human settlements are generated via the random encounter tables. That's when we actually go into the wilderness and have random encounters. Alignment. Any deviation from the lawful standard represents a separatist minority element. So I will actually roll on this alignment table a d10, and if there's a variation to this, it will be a separatist faction. So I didn't actually roll neutral, so I have a neutral faction. So within the town, there is a neutral faction that's working against the overall religion, and they could be a persecuted minority, cult, anything that you can start thinking about. So already I've got something happening from this town. I've got an overall structure of government. I've got potential conflict. The next thing I will do is I generate the characteristics of the place and the culture of its citizens using the tables in the Dungeon Master's Guide, page 100 to 102, which I've got set out here. The next thing I do is wealth, which determines the availability of equipment and services. Now, once I've gone through this generation process, I can talk about how this actually translates in practical terms to things like, you know, whether, say, chainmail armor is available in this town, or do the characters have access to the proper dungeon equipment. So again, I've chosen, I've rolled on the possessions table, a d10, and I got rich, which is probably either exceptional or superabundant. I can't honestly remember at this stage, but it's certainly way up there. Now, I've got economic downturn against it. I'll come to that because one of my later tables is about local events, and I did have as a local event an economic impact. So that's modified my overall wealth of the town. Now, appearance, again, this is pretty qualitative. I rolled a d10 and I think I got old, which meant it was showing signs of something, economic decline. Again, that's pretty general. No, sorry, I have made, yes, I used the general table, and I've got, I think I got ragged as the result. So, and I interpreted that as showing signs of economic decline. It's quite difficult actually going back over what you've already generated and trying to remember what you actually rolled and interpreted, but that was the case in this. Now, moving on to the economy, that's where I did actually create my own tables for that. So I roll on the settlement type, and I've defined basically 4 types of settlement type the town or the village can be. It can either be a farming settlement, and that's an agricultural or pastoral depending on the terrain. So when I generate the terrain for the hex, that will determine what type of farming settlement, if it is. It can be a resource settlement, and then you check what resources it relies on. So it could be like a mining town that mines silver, for example. It could be probably the most general one, which is the market settlement. So goods are traded, are based on what is being produced in other settlements locally. So it's a kind of hub for the local economy. Or a military settlement. So that gets around the bit where I said that your starting settlement should either be a village or a town or a military stronghold. So if it's a military stronghold, this is probably a bit like your Keep on the Borderlands type setup. So I rolled for freehold as if it was a market settlement. And because it was in Plains Hex, I determined that the farming was arable. Now, culture of the citizens, I could use, I went through the list of all the different traits and personality types and whatever. And I thought the ones that are most relevant were things like disposition, materiality, honesty, piety, and energy. So you could actually use this as a kind of just a general broad brush view of what the local population is like. So in the case of freehold, the disposition of the citizens, they tend to be insensitive. Now they could have, just because of the trials of living in such a remote and dangerous environment, has made them insensitive to the local conflict. Materialism, they seem to be aesthetic, which means that they are quite, I suppose, circumspect in what they do and how they live. Honesty is average, so they're reasonably honest. Energy was interesting, it was lazy, so they're not exactly the most industrious people. And piety, reverent, so they are quite God-fearing and pious believers of the Supreme Being. So that would give you a kind of just a general, if you picked a citizen out and put him in a lineup, that's kind of what his main characteristics would be. Obviously, on an individual basis, you can roll on these tables, and it could be quite different. But as a rule of thumb, that's generally what the people are like, and also it shapes how they treat the characters and how they interact. So when you're generating responses, because obviously as a solo gamer you can't roleplay, but you can almost simulate an interaction either through reaction rolls, tailored and modified by some of these factors. And that's where you've really just got to use your experience and common sense. And last but not least, we've got the interests. I thought this is a good question for what is the place known for. It might generate some really weird things, but I thought, well, why not just use the interests table and say it's known for, or it's a religious site, or it's a legendary place. It's got maybe had a battle there or something. But in the case of freehold, it came up as a nun. So, now that I've gone through my starting town, I thought, well, why not, as an example, or an exercise, why don't we generate our own starting town and see how we get on, and see how the dice fall for us. So if we call it our town, our starting town, and use my one as a template, we have got Marchtown. And what we need to do is determine whether it is a village. In that case, it would be called March Village, or a town. So we use the buckets of dice. Get these out of the way. Oh, it's a village. Right. So in that case, I'm going to have to call it March. How about Marchton? A bit like Hobbiton. So we have a population of a village. Now this does change the overall complexion of the setting, because it's a smaller settlement for you to start in, so it's got less access to services and things like equipment, which are all quite important at the start. The things like the basic things like we'll have an inn and whatever are the case, but when it comes to things like whether it's got an armourer, you could be getting into more difficult territory. Right, a village has between 600 and 900. So that is, I think that's a die. So a die. Let's see, 5 plus, a die 6 plus 5, and each of the increments are 50. So that's 500, and that's 650 for that. Oh, sorry, 600, because that's the first gap, right? That'll do for, so it's the low point. Let's determine the government, and 20% will be non-feudal. So we roll d20. I don't actually have a d20, so I have to use a die 6 to modify it. So on a 1 to 5, it's non-feudal. We roll a 19, so it is a feudal. I know we're human. Right, let's check the alignment then. So going back to our page 100, you will learn that book management is a big part of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Right, die 10. 7. We have a chaotic good. So it's a lawful neutral with a chaotic good faction. Right, let's determine its wealth. How wealthy is this village? Possessions or wealth? D10. One. None. It's impoverished. So I would interpret that as very poor. Very. Not a good start for wealth. Appearance. Are they trying to put a brave face on? Or does it just look like a dump? Let's see. Again, this is a die 10 for appearance. Nine. Nondescript. Interpret that any way you wish. you'll realize when you are generating things randomly that it's sometimes a bit tenuous how you can interpret things. But that's just the luck of the draw. Right, the economy. This is where we go back to my table and settlement type, and we have a D6. I'll stop bringing the die tray over, I'll just roll the dice. 2, so it's a farming settlement. Farming. Right, let's see what their citizens are like. We've got disposition, materialism, honesty, energy, and piety. So the first one we've got is disposition, die 10, 9, easy going. So despite being impoverished, they're pretty easy, laid back people. Good for them. Materialism. Now, are they greedy? No. Aesthetic again, probably a necessary thing in a very poor environment. Honesty. Come on guys, let's use a D8 for this. 1. Oh, scrupulous. I'm beginning to like these people, even though they're up against it. Energy. Surely they're going to be hard-working. D8, 5, normal. That's okay. And piety. That's a D12. 2. Zealots. My goodness. That's going to have consequences for our faction here, isn't it? If they're all running around like religious zealots, this chaotic good faction is going to have a bit of a hard time. I suppose they have the advantage that it is an overall lawful environment, so there shouldn't be too much persecution. Just might mean there are things like they're blocked out of positions of power. Right, so that is the culture done. What about we've done the interests. Oh, we've got the interests. Yeah, that's always quite exciting. So when they're not begging for food, what are their cultural interests? As if they have the time. So that's a D12 and a D6. So it's on this side and it's 2, so it's 14. Foods in preparation. Nice. So they might not have much food, but they can make a lot of it. Food and probably cooking. That's interesting. Okay. Right, last but not least, to give a wee bit of, this is my blurb to justify this addition, to generate some initial conflict, reasons for adventuring, or current crisis. Roll 1 die, 20 for the starting settlement. So this gives a kind of, you know, something's going on here that needs adventurers. Well, the fact that adventurers are here is not too beyond reason. 15. Besieged by enemies, recently attacked. So that could mean something is happening right now, or they're about to, or they've just been attacked. Let's go with 1, 2, 3 is besieged and recently attacked. 4 to 6. So we're being besieged. Oh dear. Events. Besieged by enemies. Well, I wasn't expecting this, but this could give us a chance to try out something else. So once you get these situations, you can use the Dungeon Master's Guide or the Player's Handbook or any of the source material just to generate some ideas. So this is probably a good idea to ask the question, well, who is besieging this town? So why not use the random encounter tables? So if we go into right, it's inhabited, and because I had it in a plain hex, let's roll a D100. So we'll take blue as the 10s. 37. Oh, brigands. Brigands are attacking the town. My goodness. So already we've got something happening. Brigands. So the dice have spoken. Well, hopefully that gives you an idea of just how you can generate your own starting town. And I think this is what I'll do at each stage, is to show what I've done with my campaign, and then we'll just generate our own little parallel universe, down to characters and places to go. So that's a good start there. That's certainly quite an interesting place for the characters to, you know, throwing them in at the deep end really with the brigands. But they might have something going on here with the persecuted chaotic good worshippers. Okay, well, I think that's I was going to talk about availability and of things like services and whatever, but I think what I'll do is I'll keep that to when I'm talking about how you can maneuver around towns and when you start your adventures in the home settlement. So that will cover things like how we generate the inns, how we generate the missions, and how you equip your characters and go around looking for equipment, and how you can turn them into kind of like little mini games, which are quite good fun. I had a lot of fun searching for my equipment and getting lost in the town. So I've got tables there to show you how you can maneuver your way around town and avoid the thieves lurking on the corner, that type of thing. Okay, well, I think that's enough for today. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.